Czarońska bänkte sjå. Sveta pointen uns det trött mer sein in dag.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the colors.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed by the twilight last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Hooray, rest.
We must remember the atrocities committed against our people, the murder of 6 million women, men, women, and children. We must remember the communities, synagogues, ideas, dreams, vision, hope, and faith that died along with our slaughtered brethren. By remembering, we keep our people alive. By remembering, we demonstrate our resilience as a people. By remembering, we give honor to the victims of the Holocaust. We fulfill one of the highest mitzvot, to care, pray for the dead. By voicing our sadness and anger at the atrocities our innocent brethren endured, we call ourselves and others to action. By voicing our opposition to hatred, we stand against prejudice and anti-Semitism. By acting in memory of those murdered, we begin to heal the brokenness of our world and to create a new beginning. The poem, Unto Every Person There Is a Name, immortalizes the names of those stripped of their identities and slaughtered, and gives us the opportunity to complete the work of Tikkun Olam.
Unto every person there is a name, bestowed on him by God and given to him by his parents.
Unto every person there is a name, accorded to him by his stature, and type of smile, and style of dress.
Unto every person there is a name, conferred by the mountains and the walls which surround him.
Unto every person there is a name, granted him by fortune's will, or which neighbors call him.
Unto every person there is a name, assigned him by his failings or contributed by his yearnings.
Unto every person there is a name, given to him by his enemies or by his love.
Unto every person there is a name, derived from his celebrations and his occupation.
Unto every person there is a name, presented by him the seasons and his blindness.
Unto every person there is a name, which he receives from the sea and is given to him by his death.
Back in the early 70s, when I was a university student, my major was modern European Jewish history, which is essentially Holocaust studies. But there were no colleges that had Holocaust studies department. There was no major of Holocaust studies. The Shoah was something still hardly spoken about. Today, at universities and colleges across the world, young students are studying the Shoah, understanding the power of hatred and the decimation of communities. And, surprisingly, foremost among them is our own Stockton University. Tonight, as we light these candles in memorial for the 6 million, some of our Stockton students studying the Shoah are going to pass the candles amongst our survivor population so that each one will hold it in memorial to their family and their neighbors and their friends. Frank and Charlena?
Candles we light wherever we are. Candles for Hanukkah. Candles for Shabbat. Candles for Havad, braided like challah. Our candles for pure delight. So many, many candles.
All kinds of shapes, all kinds of colors, all of them candles of joy. Only one candle is right, to remember someone who died, a candle for the soul. And more candles we light, in silence and in honor, 6 candles, a memorial, to the myriads who are gone, 6 million, all of them candles of sorrow.
Avraham Shlansky wrote these words, which are etched into the stone of Yad Vashem. He perfectly captures our commitment to those who perished, our responsibility to those who survive, and our obligation to God. In the presence of eyes which witnessed the slaughter, which saw the oppression the heart could not bear, and as witnessed the heart that once taught compassion until days came to pass that crushed human feeling, I have taken an oath to remember it all, to remember, not once to forget. Forget not one thing, to the last generation when degradation shall cease, to the last, to the ending, when the rod of instruction shall have come to conclusion, an oath not in vain passed over the night of terror, an oath no morning shall see me at flesh pots again, an oath lest from this we learned nothing. Eternal God, tonight we draw together to mourn the dead, to cry with our friends who mourn not the 6 million, but parents and children, brothers and sisters, neighbors and friends. We gather with them as witness to the unspeakable evil that can invade the human soul. We stand before God in the name of the martyred to proclaim with clarion resolve, never again.
As we remember the deaths of our 11 million brothers and sisters, we honor and memorialize them all, Jews and Gentiles, and others who were victims, martyrs, and heroes.
We honor those who died because they were Jews. We honor those who died because they helped Jews, those who died because they resisted the Nazis, and those who died because of their ideals and convictions.
We honor those who were tortured, impoverished, dehumanized, deported, enslaved, and murdered.
No one wanted to believe it, not Christian, not Jew. For who can confront the terrible reality of the murder of an entire people? Who can confront the murder of innocents, murdered only because they were born, murdered as a government policy?
They were murdered while the world was silent. They were murdered while the world pretended not to notice. They were murdered, most, but not all. There were survivors.
There were survivors of the Holocaust. We know them. They are the parents whose children are gone, and they are the children without parents.
We know them. They are the remnants. No brothers, no sisters, no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents, no cousins, no neighbors, no friends.
We know them, the Holocaust survivors, because they are a part of us. They belong to us. We are all members of a single family, haunted by shared memories. So many were begrudged their right to exist, and we were robbed of the gifts that they could have given to humanity. We mourn the blameless murderer, the old and the young. We hallow the memory of our martyrs.
For these do I weep, and for the millions crowded in ghettos and in detention camps, for those wandering in forests and those hidden in attics and in the underground bunkers, for those who found refuge in the bosom of another faith or who lost their God, for those who were given over to experiments in the hand of wild beasts called doctors and scientists, for those who died of hunger and of thirst, smothered to death in freight trains or in gas chambers, shot, buried alive, or cremated, for those who were brought out to be killed by hanging so that they would be seen, and for those who sanctified God's name and in the name of the people of Israel, refusing to be subdued, fighting to death, for those who lost their homes, their dignity, and their hope, and for those left alive to live the horror anew, day after day, moment after moment. For these do I weep, for infants who never learned to say mommy, for boys and girls whose youth was stolen from them, who withered before coming to blossom, for young men and women who never were blessed beneath the wedding canopy, for the elderly denied the privilege of a gracious old age, for the orchestras and for the music, and for all the world's beauty whose rainbow of colors was lost, replaced by only brown and gray and black, For all these do I weep.
On behalf of my father, Bernie, my personal hero, I don't believe there is a man in the world who knows how he will behave in a life-threatening situation until he is actually in this life-threatening situation. Before I ever was in combat, my greatest fear was that I would not be able to handle my fear and would not live up to my own expectations of how I should behave. If such a thing had happened, I don't think I would have been able to live with myself. I firmly believe that the one thing that compels men to do what they have to do, even in the worst hell of a battle, is their fear of showing fear, as well as their obligation to their comrades. What is a brave man? How do we define courage? Bravery in battle is certainly not absence of fear. In a battlefield, a man can be blown to bits. Explosions propel red-hot, jagged pieces of metal through the air, and it seems they are all coming our way. The soldiers out there have only one purpose. That is to kill you in any way that they can. If all of this does not scare you, you are not brave. You're an idiot. Here's how I would define a brave man. A brave man is one who is frightened to death, but does what he has to do despite his fears. He fulfills his obligations to his comrades and to himself. The 16th Infantry Regiment has a motto that I have never forgotten, and I quote my dad: "No mission too difficult, no sacrifice too great. Duty first." God knows and history shows that the brave men of the 16th Infantry Regiment lived up to their motto. My dad, Sergeant Bernie Friedenberg. Please say a Misha Barrett for my daddy. He's in the hospital and very ill. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, and comrades, what I am about to read to you is part of a letter written by General Eisenhower to General Marshall, Chief of Staff, in 1945, about what he saw firsthand at the first liberated concentration camp. This is also written in stone. If you go to the World War II Memorial in Washington, you will find what I'm about to say in stone written on the wall. I have never been felt able to describe my emotional reaction when I first came face to face with indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency. I visited every nook and cranny of the camp because I felt it was my duty in my position from then on to testify at firsthand about these things in case they ever grew up at home, the belief or assumption that the stories of Nazi brutality were just propaganda. He wanted it to be known. He wanted it not to be forgotten. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, Allied Forces Europe, to a letter of George Marshall, April 2nd, 1945.
Reflections after visiting Ponar, the murder site of the Jews of Vilna and the surrounding area. As I walked around the massive trees at Ponar and journeyed through these unpaved, grassy walkways, I anxiously waited for the birds singing in the trees to show me where the horrors of Ponar lie. The black soil hid a secret past, a past that Mother Earth erased so as to shield her children from knowing what occurred there 73 years ago. I knew I was there to learn about the atrocities that occurred at Ponar and to see with my own eyes the crime scene that so many other individuals have investigated before me. As I stumbled looking for the markings of atrocity similar to Auschwitz or Dachau, I soon realized that the soil that laid beneath my feet, that all the trees that these birds were chirping on, called home, was the site of the atrocities of Ponar, Valley of Slaughter. And so I stood there, unable to comprehend how the lives of 70,000 Jews were so viciously taken. These lives would have changed this world in a way that we now will never know. But then the light shining through this little candle made me understand. As long as we are still able to see these horrors and emotionally connect with the lives lost at Ponar, then hope for a peaceful world will continue to live within all of us and for generations to come.
As we stood together in front of the chasm at Ponar, I could not comprehend what I was seeing in front of me. Surrounding us were lush green forests with warm sunlight streaming through the trees. Birds were chirping happily in the distance. It was a beautiful day. But underneath that apparent calm, there was an atmosphere of grief that clung to all of us as we learned of what occurred below where we stood. Not a single one of us could hold back tears. Together, we wept for the thousands of Jewish lives that were so callously taken in those 4 years. Together, we mourn the loss of those innocent lives. The terror of the men, women, and children who were murdered there weighed heavy on our hearts. We made a promise standing there in front of the victims' graves that their stories would always be remembered. Looking out over the pits, each of us swore to bear witness to this tragedy, to teach others of what happened during the Shoah, to never forget.
Stille, stille, lass mir schweigen vor ihm wachsen da. Schoben sie verpflanzte Sonne im grünen See zum Blau. Svieren Wegen Tapanar zu, sviert kein Weg zu ich. Ist der Tate, wo verfuden und mit ihm das Glück. Stiller kind man wenn äußer Held nicht gern gewähnt. Unser Ungling willen zu ihm sei wir nicht verstehen. Soben bräges euch nicht jammen, soben fieses euch det sammen, nur zu unser Bein kein be so shine, kein be so shine.
Quiet, quiet, let's be silent, dead are growing here. They were planted by the tyrant, see their bloom appear. All the roads lead to Ponar, now there are no roads back. And our father too has vanished, and with him our luck. Still, my child, don't cry, my jewel, tears no help commands. Our misfortune callous people never understand. Seas and oceans have their order, prison also has its order. But to our plight there is no light, there is no light.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרבים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השינה. במעלת קדושים וטהורים כזר רקיע מזהירים. את נשמת אחינו בני ישראל הקדושים והטהורים שנפלו בידי הרוצחים ונשפך דמם באושוויץ, בלז, ברגן-בלזן, דכאו, מאוטהאוזן, מיידנק, סוביבור, טרבלינקה, ובגטאות של ביאליסטוק, קרקוב, לודז', לבוב, לובלין, מינסק, וילנה, ורשה, ובשאר מחנות השמד ברובها שנהרגו ושנשחטו ושנשרפו ושנטבחו ושנחנקו על קידוש השם בעבור שכל הקהל הקדוש הזה מתפללים יד הזכרת נשמתם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם לכן מל הרחמים הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו על משכבותם בשלום ונאמר
Please, if you would, join me for the first paragraph in the English, and I will conclude with the final one on page 11. O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant perfect rest in your divine presence to all the souls of our holy and pure brethren who died at the hands of the murderers in the camps, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Mauthausen, Sobibor, Treblinka, in the ghettos of Bialystok, Krakow, Lodz, Lvov, Lublin, Minsk, Vilna, and Warsaw, and other death camps and ghettos in Europe, who were killed, strangled, burned, and buried alive for the sanctification of your name, and for whose souls we now pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings for eternity. May he bind their souls in the bond of eternal life. God is their heritage, and may they repose in peace in their resting places. Now, let us say, Amen.
Amen.
This evening, we remember many of those places where our brothers and sisters perished because of man's inhumanity to man. We are grief-stricken, recalling our brothers and sisters who no longer walk this earth, cut down whether in youth or in old age, by the vicious hand of evil. We look to God and to each other to find comfort with the hope that we will be sustained through our sorrow. In testimony to the unbroken faith that is linked generation to generation, we together recite the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah v'yalma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayei echon v'yom echon uv'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael v'agalau v'zman kariv v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach la'olam l'olmei omaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh Yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shemei d'Kudesha b'richu Ve'elam min kol birchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechamata Damiran ba'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabbah min Shemaya V'chaim oleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh Shalom b'mroma, Oseh Shalom oleinu v'yal kol Yisrael. Amen. You may be seated.
It is my pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, Ruth Zinman. She's a Holocaust survivor who resides in Ventnor. Ruth will share with us this evening her story of survival as a child during the Shoah. She was born in the town of Oradea, Transylvania, located in northwestern Romania. In 1944, approximately 25,000 Jews were deported from her hometown to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Many of her cousins were among those deported. Today, less than 300 Jews live in that city. I ask that you listen carefully. This is a difficult task for a Holocaust survivor. Retelling brings back the horror and rekindles the sorrow and the loss. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said, "We cannot bring the dead back to life, but we can bring their memory back to life and ensure they are not forgotten." Ruth Zinman was a witness, and it is your responsibility to remember and retell her story. That is why she is speaking here tonight, so that her memories may be passed to your generation, and you, who personally have the honor and the privilege to hear a survivor speak, may carry them forward into the future so that all will know and bear witness.
My husband didn't believe that I was a Holocaust survivor. "You were never in a concentration camp," he said, "so you're not a Holocaust survivor." I spent years not knowing what in the world I was. It was like being a person without a country. When the war started, I was only 3 years old. Had I been deported, I wouldn't be alive today. In a concentration camp, I would have been sent straight to the gas chambers, together with my mother. Like so many others, she would have gone wherever I went. The Germans didn't even try to separate mothers from their children because they knew that no mother would want to be without her child. Years later, I saw a small ad in the New York Times. It had some information of what was to be the first World Convention of Hidden Children in New York City. So that's what I was. I had finally found my identity. In reality, I only spent one night hidden by some peasants before crossing the border from Hungary to Romania. But I thought that it qualified. We went to the convention, and my husband was moved to tears when he saw several people standing quietly, holding up a sign with the name of it. These people were trying to find out what happened to relatives who never came back, hoping that someone would recognize a name and have some information about the missing person. I saw a sign that said child survivors. I remember sitting in a circle with about a dozen other survivors. We looked at each other and said, we lost our childhood. I was born in Oradea, Transylvania, which at the time was part of Romania. Like so many places in Europe, cities and territories went from being in one country to another. My husband used to say, Europe has movable borders. I was born in a castle. No, I'm not a princess, but I lived in a castle for the first few years of my life. My father, who was a doctor, worked for the state and was given the territory which surrounded the castle. At an earlier time, the castle probably belonged to nobility. The castle had a turret, and late at night, my father used to go up and mix some stuff to give to the patients who couldn't afford to buy medicine. In my mind's eye, I can just see it. Late at night, a mysterious figure climbs up into the turret of the castle, where he mixes his magical potions. I don't remember too many patients coming to see my father. On the other hand, when a sick person needed him, he went there in a horse-drawn buggy. In those days, doctors made house calls. Sometime in the middle of the winter, there were wild wolves howling when he rode by, and he had to light pieces of newspaper to scare them away. After a few years, my father was transferred to a small town where we lived in the middle of everything. My father used to take me to the village inn, where he was very popular, and let me sip the white foam from the top of his beer. My mother, who was also a doctor, went back to school and became a dentist. 2 doctors in Europe would starve, she said. She opened an office in a town nearby and only came home on weekends. I used to run to her yelling, "What did you bring me?" Inside a small suitcase, there was good food: chocolate, oranges, and cold cuts. When the war started and Romania became an ally of Germany, we tried to escape to Russia, but were caught while trying to cross the border and put in prison. My mother and I stayed overnight. My father remained in jail until my father was able to get him released on bail. So she had to find a lawyer and make arrangements, and that's when she sent me to Hungary to stay with my uncle and his family. On the way over, I had one of the scariest experiences in my life. In order to cross the border, we had to crawl under some trains. I was terrified that the trains would start while we were under them. To this day, I'm afraid of trains. When I see the huge wheels, I'm terrified. I would rather take any other form of transportation, including airplanes, of which I'm not too fond either. I spent some time with my cousins in Hungary and had lots of fun. My uncle, who was also a doctor, lived in a big house in a countryside and had many servants. I also had a cousin, Paul, who was only a few years older than I was. I spent the high holidays with them, and coming from a religious family, my uncle made a big deal out of it. The servants killed 1 chicken for every member of the family, according to the ancient Jewish tradition of kapara, or atonement. During the war, my uncle, aunt, and my cousin Paul were taken to Auschwitz. My aunt died there, but my uncle and cousins survived. My cousin later went to Russia and opened the biggest puppet theater in Moscow. After getting my father out of jail, my mother sent for me. My journey back was just as traumatic as before. This time I had to spend the night in a peasant's hut and hated every minute of it. I was so angry that I had to stay with strangers that I didn't speak, eat, or drink while there. The hut was made of straw and dung, and a baby cried most of the night. Inside the hut, there was also a goat, and it smelled bad. Finally, we returned to Romania. I joined my mother in a one-room flat on the second floor of an apartment building across the street from a synagogue. The first thing I said, "Wow, all my toys." The toys were left behind, as was a way of life we never had again. Not long after that, my father was conscripted as an officer into the Romanian army and worked in a hospital in Odessa, now part of Ukraine. My mother and I were left alone. My mother was strong and resourceful, qualities that I inherited from her. I think that I could survive on an iceberg. On a cold winter night, a night I will never forget, there were several inches of snow on the ground. I was bundled up under a big feather bed, felt warm and cozy. Around midnight, my mother woke me up and motioned me to be quiet. "Get dressed," she whispered. In the dark, I grabbed some clothes and put them on top of my pajamas. Strangely, my mother was wearing her black Persian lamb coat. To this day, whenever I see a black Persian lamb coat, I shudder. There were strange moving shadows reflected on the walls and ceiling. The sounds of singing and shouting came from across the street. My mother threw my heavy top coat on me and told me to put it on. It wasn't easy to get the coat over what I already was wearing, but hearing her tense voice, I obeyed without a word. My mother's face was very serious. She was nervous, kept picking at her fur coat. By the end of the war, there were 2 bald spots on the coat where her hands had been pulling out the fur every time something bad was going on. We went out on the balcony and saw that across the street, in the courtyard of the synagogue, there was a bonfire. In the light of the red flames, there were black figures dancing grotesquely around the fire. They kept the fire going by throwing black things into it. The black things caught fire, became twisted, and opened up to reveal the pages of prayer books. Didn't take long for me to realize that they were wearing black shirts. They were fascists, a violent anti-Semitic group who committed the most atrocious crimes against the Jews. Just when it seemed that they ran out of prayer books, they went back inside the synagogue and came back bearing the Torah scrolls triumphantly. They carried them like trophies, shaking the silver bells that were on top of the scrolls. The sounds of the bells were like weak cries of desperation for mercy and for someone to witness the atrocity. The scrolls were enveloped in velvet covers, embroidered with religious symbols and beautiful designs. Scribes had painstakingly handwritten the words of the Torah on the parchment. Soon the smell of burning fabric reached us, and the acrid odor propelled my mother into action. She looked around, and her eyes focused on a mound of snow just below the balcony. With a quick motion, she pointed to the snow and said, "If they come, I will jump on top of the snow, and I won't get hurt because the snow is soft. Then you jump on top of me." Only the sight of them coming through the door would have made me jump. To this day, I hate heights. I have never lived in a high-rise and tried to live as close to the ground as possible. After they burned everything in the synagogue, the fascists went from house to house looking for Jews. When they came to ours, the janitor stood in the doorway. The fascists asked him if there were any Jews living there, and the janitor said, "There are no Jews here." Every one of us has an image of how angels look. For me, my angel has the face of the janitor. My mother eventually married, my mother went to medical school and met my father. As Hitler's influence grew, Jews were not allowed to go to medical school in Romania, and my parents had to go to Prague, Czechoslovakia, and eventually graduate from medical school in Vienna, Austria. They were so poor, many times they had to go to the soup kitchen and to the deli, where they bought the ends of salami, the part that's tied with a string. The string was free of charge. During the war, we lost contact with my Nagypapa, my grandfather, because he lived in Hungary. After the war, my mother went to every documentary movie to catch a glimpse of him. She finally found out that after 2 months in the ghetto, he was loaded into a cattle car and on the way to Auschwitz. He never made it, he suffocated. I have visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington several times. I probably have seen everything, but I stay away from the cattle cars because they remind me of my Nagypapa, who gave me my most prized possession, Matsko, my teddy bear, who has been my companion ever since. My mother cut up his stomach and hid dollars in there when we were smuggling. While at the Holocaust Museum, my late husband, whose family roots were in Lithuania, tried to find their hometown, Kovna. He couldn't even find it on the map. It had been completely obliterated by the Nazis. We lived in a small apartment in a square courtyard in Bucharest. There were apartments on all sides except for a wide gate opening into the street. There was an outside bathroom, but I never saw the inside of the outside bathroom. Remember, I was an only child. My mother told me that she wanted more children, but the war intervened. On October 17, 1941, 80% of the 210,000 Jews in the region were killed. Most of them were taken to Auschwitz. The train passed near the hospital where my father worked. When he found out that we might be deported, he made a plan with the nurses who adored him to get us off the train when it got near the hospital. They didn't know that about 15 miles before it reached the hospital, everybody was taken off the train, shot, and buried in trenches. After the deportation stopped, the Allies, trying to destroy the railroad tracks leading to the oil field in Ploiesti, flew over Bucharest every night, dropping bombs en route. Every night we went to bed fully dressed, and every night, without fail, the bombing continued. My mother used to go to a different air raid shelter every night, as if trying to find a better one. The best one, of course, was where the bomb didn't fall. The war was over soon after, and I remember hearing the sirens, which meant that this was the end. After the war, young girls and boys came to Europe to encourage Holocaust survivors to come to the only place in the world where Jews were welcome, Palestine. The young Zionists had a great program for us. We danced the Hora, sang songs in Hebrew, and felt a sense of belonging we had never had before. When I decided to join my group and go to Palestine to establish a kibbutz in the desert, my mother panicked. Fearing that she would never see me again, she decided to move the whole family. Ours was the first legal immigration ship to Palestine. It was called Atzmaut, Independence, and our captain was Ike Aronowitz, the same one who was the captain of the Exodus. Soon after we arrived, the State of Israel was established. I was working in the Israeli government. Many tourists came to have certain papers checked before sending them overseas. It was there that I met a young American tourist, David, whom I married in 1956, and he took me to America as a souvenir. I found out that my father had died 7 days after his death. He made my mother promise him that she wouldn't let me know that he had died for 1 week. In the Jewish tradition, a family member doesn't have to sit shiva for 7 days after the death of a close relative if they don't know about the death. After 7 days, the person is required to sit shiva only for 1 hour. The incident caused me great sadness, but it illustrates the unbelievable love my father had for me. He told my mother that he didn't want to take me away from my family and children and my work. His unselfish love sustained me through my entire life. In the U.S., David and I had 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Over the years, I have been teaching Hebrew in various religious schools since the late 50s. My ultimate goal is to raise awareness in the young generation and instill in them a sense of pride for the rich history of the Jewish people and their amazing accomplishments.
On April 19, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising began. The ghetto fighters were able to resist for nearly 1 month. News of the resistance traveled to the Vilna ghetto, where Vilna poet and underground fighter Hirsch Glick wrote the Yiddish song Zognit Kinmol. The song became the anthem for the Jewish partisans. Please rise.
Sog niet keinmal als du gehst dem letzten Weg, wenn Himmeln bleien verstehen blaue Tag. Komm in Welt nach unser Eis gebänkt, bänkte sjå. Sveta pointen uns det trött mer sein in då. Kom in värld nach unser ois gebänkte sjå. Sveta pointen uns det trött mer sein in då. Von grünem Palmland bis Weideland von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen es spritzt von unser Blut. Sputzen fett tut unser Gwure, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen es spritzt von unser Blut. Sprutzen fett tut unser Gwure, unser Mut. Sog nicht keinmal, als du gehst am letzten Weg. Wenn Himmeln bleien verstehen bleie Tag. Kommen fett noch unser ausgebänkte Schau. Sveta pointen uns det trott, mir seinen da. Kommen fett noch unser ausgebänkte Schau. Sveta pointen uns det trott, mir seinen da.
Chana Lobonetsky was born on March 2nd, 1920, in Nowe Miasto, Poland, a small town about 50 miles southeast of Warsaw. She was the second child in a family of 4 girls and a boy. In 1942, after living in the ghetto of her own town, my mother, Chana, her 2 sisters, Lanka and Hinja, and their 13-year-old brother, Shmuel, along with their mother, my grandmother, were sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Shortly after their arrival, Shmuel and my grandmother, Toby, were murdered. My mother and my 2 aunts survived together in Auschwitz-Birkenau for almost 3 years before being liberated in early 1945. The numbers on their arms were tattooed in sequence, beginning with 25722 on my mother's left arm. In 1948, my Aunt Hinja moved to the emerging state of Israel. Last month, my mother celebrated her 95th birthday and lives on Long Island. My Aunt Leona, that's how she now likes to be called, is 89, lives in Cherry Hill. They still argue over their true ages as they have for the last 50 years. My father, Yitzchak Posner, was born on June 6, 1914, in Oświęcim, Poland, a town better known to the world by what it's next to, Auschwitz-Birkenau. Yitzchak was the youngest in a family of 11, having a brother that was almost 20 years his senior. All of his siblings were married with children before the war. My father spent most of the war years in various camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau, where the number 184481 was tattooed on his left arm. My dad was eventually transported to Buchenwald concentration camp, from which he was liberated, soon discovering that he was the only survivor of his very large family. My mom and dad met in 1946. I soon followed 1947, and 1950 our family immigrated to New York from Wiesbaden, Germany, where I was born. My dad lived a happy and long life, mostly in Brooklyn, and died just short of his 90th birthday. In March of 2013, as part of a study tour to Germany and the Netherlands, organized by the Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center, I, along with a group of 25, many of whom I see here tonight, visited Buchenwald concentration camp. It was a brutally cold, snowy day.
when I was handed copies of several documents with my dad's signature and was able to walk in the same footsteps where my dad was brutally confined. This evening, I am honored and humbled to stand before you as a representative of this community's second generation. As much as my fellow baby boomers refuse to accept it, yes, we are getting older, and while retirement is close for many of my generation, there is one task that never ends. Just like survivors, we, members of the second generation, treasure a special bond and carry a sacred duty to honor our parents and the survivors among us, to sustain humanity by reminding the world of the truths that we know all too well.
We come to the passing of the legacy. From generation to generation, the survivors beckon us. I will ask the survivors among us to please rise, and if you are able, to recite and remain standing through the completion of all 4 generations. Ruth, would you lead them in the passing of the legacy? Entrust the legacy of the Shoah to you, our children and grandchildren, and all those who have come after the fire. We want you to vow that the sacred memory of our suffering and our martyrdom shall never be scorned or erased. We want you to recall the heroism of Jewish resistance. Remember the shining examples of sacrifice and kindness from the righteous Gentiles. Remember the racial prejudice and discrimination that led to the Holocaust. By not forgetting, you will pay tribute to those who were destroyed. By not forgetting, you will ensure for those who live and those who are yet to be born that we intend never to allow such inhumanity to happen again. This is the heritage we, the survivors, entrust to your custody for safekeeping for all the generations to come. Together, we accept the obligation of this legacy. Second generation, if you would please rise and remain standing.
We are the first generation born after the darkness. Through our parents, memories, words, and silence, we are linked to that annihilated Jewish existence whose echoes permeate our consciousness.
We dedicate this pledge to you, our parents who suffered and survived, to our grandparents who perished in the flames, to our vanished brothers and sisters, more than 1 million Jewish children so brutally murdered, to all 6 million whose unyielding spiritual and physical resistance, even in the camps and ghettos, exemplifies our people's commitments to life.
Pledge to remember. Third generation, please rise and remain standing.
We shall teach our children to preserve forever that uprooted Jewish spirit which could not be destroyed. We shall tell the world of the depths to which humanity can sink and the heights which were attained even in hell itself. We shall fight anti-Semitism and all forms of racial hatred by our dedication to freedom throughout the world.
Fourth generation, please rise, recite, and remain standing.
We affirm our commitment to the State of Israel and to furtherance of Jewish life in our homeland.
We pledge to ourselves to the oneness of the Jewish people. We are your children. We are here. Please be seated.
Together. Ani ma'amin, אתה משיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתממיה, עם כל זה אני מאמין.
Twilight has settled in. The gloaming has become night. Some here know the coarse grip of darkness, the unyielding human hand choking off light. Most of us know only words that have sought to describe it. Those who know, and those who can only, if they dare, imagine, we all acknowledge the challenge of our God, Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech, God who crafted light and thereby created darkness. We who choose to remember the light of lives we've known, lives we've read, lives we've heard, lives we will never know or read or hear. We are here to remember. We are here to bemoan the darkness that overwhelmed, to lament the emptiness of could have been, should have been. And we are here to accept that our lives have been diminished by 6 million scars, and to determine that our lives will be strengthened by 6 million stars. Baruch Adonai Bayom, Baruch Adonai Balayla. Every evening we pray. Praise God in the light of day, in the glow of joy, in the glare of celebration. And every evening we pray. Praise God in the dark of night, in the gloom of sorrow, in the depths of mourning. We look to God. We praise God for the strength to remain hopeful, for the strength to choose life, for the strength to carry with us and within us the light of memory. Bo'achem l'shalom. We came together tonight in search of peace, of wholeness. Tzeitchem l'shalom. As we take our leave, may we find a measure of peace, peace of mind, peace of heart, to help us toward wholeness and healing.
I ask the congregation to rise and to join our area cantors in Hatikva and God Bless America.
I
Friends, if you would please remain at your seats and remain standing until after the colors have left the sanctuary.
This way, Alan.
There you go.
Alan!